I'm thinking about history and I'm thinking about our ability to self-correct and, make these changes. And, at the end of the day, we've always had a fear of too much debt. And Ross Perot got involved and we had the whole fear over even the Reagan tax cuts. And there was always this give and take, but there was a certain fear that both parties had of letting spending get out of control. I go back to my interview with Chris Leonard about Ben Bernanke and Tom Honig's conversation in 2010 about quantitative easing. Ben won out and Tom lost, but the issue was once you start quantitative easing, once you start monetizing your debt, you'll never be able to stop. And I wish I didn't feel so strongly that the way the puck is going is that until Americans wake up to the fact that we really, really have this kind of uncontrollable inflation because we're in this catch 22 and that we've got to go through some kind of austerity. Both parties are just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. I don't think anybody has the fortitude to really make these tough decisions because they bought into this fantasy that MMT, modern, monetary theory, that somehow we can do this, forever. And we've been doing it for 15 years now. And so I really think until the bond vigilantes show up, you're going to have to be patient. I think your ideas are fabulous. I'd love to see them taken off the shelf tomorrow, but I think it's going to take a crisis.
Well, Chris Leonard's book, The Lords of Easy Money, is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it to anyone who you haven't already recommended it to. And I wrote an essay on a related theme for National Affairs called Bitcoin and the U.S. Fiscal Reckoning, which is about this issue of why we've been able to run these giant deficits over the last several decades. I argue in that essay that it really starts with the severance of the relationship between dollar and gold in 1971, because the Ross Perots, the people of that era who were used to the value of the dollar being tied to a certain amount of gold, you couldn't run deficits in that environment because you run out of gold. That has happened throughout history with severe consequences for the country to whom it happened. But that was always the governor. The thing that actually prevented you from running the giant deficits and debt that we're running up is the fact that you would run out of gold. And we were literally running out of gold in 1970, 71. Countries were sending their battleships and their destroyers to get their gold out of the U.S. and bring it back to their home countries. And Nixon was like, well, we can't run out of gold. That would be bad. So let's suspend the relationship between the dollar and gold. And of course, that suspension has remained with us for now 55 years. And the dollar's value has floated freely as with every other currency. And those of us who are young, I'm 53, so I've lived almost my entire life under this. In fact, my entire life under this system. For us, it seems normal that you travel abroad, these currencies fluctuate, and that seems perfectly normal. And what people, I think, don't appreciate is actually it's an unprecedented monetary experiment for there to be this approach to the way money works. And that has been the biggest driver of why we've been able to run this deficit and debt, because we severed the relationship between the dollar and gold at a time when we were the world's premier superpower. And that has been what's allowed us to borrow and borrow and borrow. But economic gravity, the laws of economic gravity don't change. And I fear that because we've been so used to being the world's top dog and having this ability to borrow in our own currency, that we are very, very unprepared for what happens next. Let's just hope that we solve the problem before it gets there.